being exposed to porn at a young, vulnerable age like that, that is the trauma. Oh yeah, that feels good. I like feeling different. This doesn't help me, I'm still stuck in this. I don't feel any better.
We are not experts on trauma. And this is kind of where, staying in your own lane comes in a little bit, because a lot of the people we're roasting is they're trying to be experts in every single thing. I'd much rather put my hands up and say, look, we're experts in dealing with compulsive desires.
If someone really has been through serious trauma and needs help for that, I don't want to be like, oh, your trauma doesn't matter.
Hello and welcome back to the Help Is Here podcast. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about shame and its role in porn addiction recovery. Welcome on the podcast, Mary. I'm going to just share a little bit of a quick story and then we'll go over to you. So today I was talking to a guy who he'd been listening to a few of our videos on YouTube and I think he was finding them quite useful. And he was talking about how he'd recently relapsed after 8 months of sobriety. He hadn't watched porn for a long time. And then he'd relapsed and he's back in the cycle now and struggling quite a lot. And this is quite common for some of the guys we talk to. I think people online have this misconception that people struggling with porn are like watching porn like 8 times a day, like every day. And that may be the case for some people, but also a lot of the people we work with, they do go on these streaks and sometimes they go for quite a long time without porn. And then they end up relapsing and getting right back in that addictive sort of state and being in a really bad place with it all. So he was saying that he feels like he needs to work on the shame side of things more because he's feeling a lot of shame around things. And I asked him a few questions. I said, well, okay, during those 8 months, did you stop feeling the shame at any point? And he was like, yeah, after a while it kind of went because he wasn't watching porn, which makes kind of sense, right? And then I was like, okay, so how did you end up relapsing after 8 months if shame is the reason you're watching porn? Like, that doesn't really make sense. Like, the shame went and then you still ended up relapsing after 8 months. Like, how is that possible? So I think that kind of sets the tone of what we'll probably talk about a bit today. But I want to kind of go over to you and give you the space maybe to answer this question. Like, why isn't dealing with the shame going to be the thing that enables you to overcome your porn addiction?
Well, I think it's, because, I feel like the porn addiction causes the shame. Do you know what I mean? And it's not the reason. It's like, we try to teach the guys right from the start that having the porn addiction doesn't mean there's anything wrong with them, because I feel like in my work with addictions, I think that shame is the most prevalent in porn addiction. Maybe food addiction is a close second, but I feel like it's more prevalent in porn addiction just because society kind of has shame with a lot of like the religious beliefs. There's a lot of shame around sexual stuff, around sexual desire, whatever, and some of the religions are just flat out, teach you that it's really evil and stuff like that, so there's a lot of shame around it. But that's where we teach the guys that having these addicted neural pathways doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with them. We even write that into the script for those that feel more shame, to lose the resistance to changing those pathways. But it's kind of, again, that cart before the horse, deal with the shame and then the desire to use porn is going to go away. No, if you deal with the desire to use porn directly, then the shame will go away as well, because shame is just one of the costs of engaging in the behavior, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah.
I think to me it's so clear, and I kind of want to get this across to people more. Otherwise, they're going to go down the same route that I once went down, which is where you go and listen to someone like Sarah Brewer for 100 episodes, or you go and read like 4 books by Brené Brown and, these experts on shame. That's what I did, but I had then still relapsed. And I think the problem as well is like, you are going to feel very uncomfortable if you're still stuck relapsing, like if you're still in that cycle. And shame is a big, big consequence of being in a porn addiction. And I'm not saying, oh, you should feel any more shame than is necessary. You know, if you can reduce that shame somehow, then that's a good thing. And I honestly, like hand on heart, know with like 100% of my being that there is nothing wrong with people like down to the core for watching porn, because people watch the porn because of the repetition. Like it's the reps that you're going through, like between maybe the ages of like 11 and like 18 or however young you are when you first get exposed to porn. Like that wiring, that's what's led to you having that desire for porn. And that's like so clear to me now. It's like I just see like, well, yeah, I was like 11 or 12, I didn't even know porn had any consequences, and I watched it pretty much every day for like 5 years. It's like, well, yeah, obviously you're going to end up wanting to watch porn because your brain gets wired in that way, right? So that's one thing. But then just what I was saying about, the shame being like a big consequence of the porn addiction, as crazy as this sounds, I don't actually think it's necessarily the best route to try and alleviate the consequences of the porn addiction, because then it's kind of like you're denying the reality of the porn addiction. And then you can end up even minimizing it and being like, okay, this problem isn't that bad. I just need to work on the symptoms of it. So now I need to deal with like the loneliness that it's causing me. I need to deal with the stress it's causing me. I need to deal with the shame it's causing me. And that's the route that I see so many guys go down. And it's the route I went down as well. But like as crazy as it sounds, like being pissed off about being in the porn addiction is not a bad thing. Like it's uncomfortable, but you can use that discomfort to go like, I'm sick and tired of this shit. I'm gonna get myself out of it. And when you know
Yeah.
that's 100% possible, you're gonna do anything you can to get yourself out of that porn addiction, and that is an amazing thing. And that's what led to me like setting up a podcast, years ago, and talking to experts all around the world and listening to a load of bullshit until Mary came along and actually helped me get out of it for good. And it was like that drive, like that desire to change. That desire to change was so strong in me. And maybe it was even like shame, one of those, shame being one of the consequences of being in the porn addiction that like led to me wanting to change so freaking badly that I was willing to do whatever
Yeah.
really to yeah, create that change for myself and actually stop the porn addiction and therefore get rid of the shame in that way.
Well, it's only one of, like you said, only one of the consequences. It's a big one. It's a driving force consequence for sure with you feeling like that. But, and it's not always just like the old shame or something that you're going to go deal with the trauma of of the shame, which interesting. You said earlier in one of the message to the guys that it was just, that shame was just one of those consequences. And when you get past it, then you get to leave behind all the consequences, right? But it reminds me so much of, the similarities between food compulsion and porn compulsion, because with food compulsion, they're completely and totally focusing on the symptoms. They're trying to correct the symptoms, one of them being obesity, right? And all of the other negative health consequences that come from being obese. But they're going after these symptoms and trying to correct that. And then, but the person still has the food compulsion. So it's just a vicious cycle. You just stay there because you're not dealing with the driving force, which is the addicted neural pathways, not the shame from, you know,
Yeah,
wherever they're going to go dig up the shame from however many years ago. It's
yeah,
like, but they're trying, I guess, to, alleviate the shame, and then you're not going to want to do it anymore. But the thing is, as long as you have neural pathways and you want to do it and you do it, you're going to continue to have the shame. And it's
yeah,
only one of the consequences. So
exactly.
I mean, are they going to focus on each consequence? I guess they try to, right? Oh, it's boredom, right? It's stress, it's shame, it's this, it's that. So we're going to go try to correct these things, and then somehow miraculously the desire is going to go away. Not true. It doesn't work like that. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Another way of putting it, so I mean, you've already kind of said this about, the food and making that comparison, but
Yeah.
we look at it that way, like you can kind of think how someone might go get, gastric bypass surgery because they're
Yes.
overweight, because they think their problem is that their body is big now, like they're obese, right? So it's like,
Yeah.
okay, my body's big, so now I need to change that. And they look at the physical instead of the mental. And so they're not actually changing their mindset and learning how to deal with their own desires and being in control of themselves. They're going to go get a gastric bypass instead,
Yeah.
right? So that's like what people do in the food compulsion world. And like a really good sort of version of that in the porn addiction world would be someone having erectile dysfunction, which is another symptom of porn addiction, and then
Yes.
going and taking Viagra. Is kind of
Right.
the same thing. Viagra is the gastric bypass of the porn addiction world.
Right. Yeah.
That's how it is. So
Yeah.
hopefully that can make some sense to people, and you can see that actually dealing with the problem at the symptom level is not going to deal with it at the root of it. And the crazy thing about the root of it is that the root of it isn't actually to do with what happened when you were younger and childhood trauma. It's that repetition of watching porn continuously over and over for many years, which wires the neural pathways in a certain way.
Well, I just thought of what I was going to say before. And what you did say was that the trauma, I mean, it's like some of the guys, they just don't have traumatic childhoods, right? To go dig up that particular thing that happened to you that the trauma is being 10 years old and getting exposed to porn, getting caught in this addiction, creating these addictive neural pathways and doing it day in and day out and not knowing how to stop and feeling horrible. There's your trauma, that's traumatic. For these young guys, it's like, coming into their sexuality and then getting exposed to porn, getting addicted and going, what the hell's happening to me? That's trauma,
Yeah,
repeated trauma. So it's
yeah,
all just kind of backwards. So,
definitely,
and if there
definitely.
is some trauma to be dealt with, then you'll be able to do that in a way that there's some clarity and it's actually productive if you are able to get free of the addiction. So you got to free up space, in your brain to not be in the addiction and want to do it, want to stop. Oh my God, I'm stuck in this shit, where you have some space in there to be able to go, oh, what are some of maybe the messages I got when I was young that are maybe affecting me, in my life and my choices and things like that. Things that might drive you not necessarily into an addiction, but drive you into making poor choices for yourself. But those messages really don't come clear, when you're in an addiction because addictions take up so much mental space. They come to the forefront and they're just the issue all the time. So, yeah, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. And what you said about like trauma and, being a young person, getting exposed to porn and wiring these neural pathways, I think when you first do that, it's not too traumatic right away because you don't really know what you're getting into. I think it's when you then try and stop the behavior and you're like, shit, like, how do I do this? And you go
Yeah.
online and you're trying to figure that out. That's when things get pretty traumatic.
Yeah.
And when we call it traumatic, I mean, obviously there's more extremes out there, but for me anyway, like it probably was one of the worst things in my life is spending hours and hours online, consuming all this information, trying all these tips, doing all this stuff that all these different experts are telling me to do, and then still having all this desire, still wanting to watch porn and then inevitably relapsing. And it just made me feel so strongly that there was something wrong with me. Like,
Hmm.
what the hell's going on here? Like, why can't I stop this behavior? And, I've talked about that so many times before, but it's so important to get that across because I think that's the big thing that so many people feel the same way. Like they feel like there's something wrong with them. And that's what creates really strong feelings of shame. And then that all gets compounded way further by the misinformation online.
Yeah.
Hence our choice to make these videos more and more where we're exposing a lot of the bullshit, which actually creates way more of the shame because it's the misinformation and applying that misinformation without knowing it's misinformation that leads to people really feeling like, Jesus Christ, like I'm doing everything right and yet I'm still relapsing, like I'm still having this desire. So therefore, what is wrong with me?
You know, I don't want to like downplay people's trauma because some people have had like really serious trauma in their childhoods, right? And they may be more susceptible to addiction, right? Because someone who has a pretty good childhood, they go out and get their hands on some drugs or alcohol, and they're like, oh, that was fun, and where someone who's living in a traumatic situation or just feels like shit a lot of the time because they've been traumatized, they get their hands on drugs and they're like, oh yeah, that feels good. I like feeling different. So then they might want to label it an addictive personality or whatever, but it's just kind of that setup. But I feel like what we're seeing working with porn addiction, whether the guys have, traumatic childhood or not. And I don't feel like it's the majority of the guys I mean, it's, I don't know. No one really talks about, oh, had this terrible trauma. I just feel really that being exposed to porn at a young, vulnerable age like that, that is the trauma. So they all have trauma, but it's directly related to the porn addiction. I mean, maybe I'm saying the same thing just in a different way, but you know, I just want to get the point across. I don't want to, if someone really has been through serious trauma and needs help for that, I don't want to be like, oh, your trauma doesn't matter, because that's not true either. I want to
Yeah.
validate that that can be really challenging emotionally, and maybe you need therapy and help for that or whatever, but it's not what we're talking about here, and it's not the majority for sure. It's not the majority. And 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 being stuck in any addiction, not just porn, is traumatic, and it's ongoing, and it's reinforced trauma all the time. And with food compulsion, you know that these people they're traumatized as well, because they're like, normally, I mean, their parents are diet obsessed or fitness obsessed or whatever, and they're passing on these bad messages about nutrition and all this stuff to these kids. And so the kids end up gaining weight, and then they get put on these diets, and probably maybe picked on, although they don't get picked on as much because so many of the kids are obese now. It's so normal, that it's traumatizing, ongoing trauma, being having their addictions mistreated, and the thing is addicts they know they're stuck in there, and they know that all this bullshit we've been, roasting online is like, they go, this doesn't help me, I'm still stuck in this. I don't feel any better, and then so then like you said, then it becomes, what's wrong with me? And now
Mm.
you're going to traumatize yourself by having these self-deprecating thoughts all the time. Now let's just add your, own self-traumatizing, behavior or thoughts, or whatever. And so again, it's a vicious cycle. So yeah,
Yeah.
cart before the horse. Yeah.
I think the other couple of things just to say on trauma as well is like, with my understanding of the addicted part of the mind, what I can definitely imagine is if someone has gone through some kind of trauma, especially if it's sort of sexually related,
Yeah.
what could then happen is the addicted part of the mind is going to really, really try and team up with the child self, or whatever age you were, I
Exactly.
suppose. Yeah, like when
Exactly.
you went through that trauma, and is going to try and recruit that like child part of you, and is going to try get that child on the same team, and then use certain
Yes.
strategies and really get you, feeling like it was your fault that something horrible happened to you, and making you self-deprecate, and it's going to use that as a strategy to make you feel a shit ton of
Yes.
discomfort and pain
Yeah.
and horrible, and then it's going to say, look, here's some porn, this is going to get you out of this discomfort, because that's what the addicted part of the mind wants. And so
Yeah.
it can definitely use the trauma and the shame as a strategy, and that makes complete sense from the lens of the beyond compulsion method and everything we teach. But what I
Yes.
would say is, what we do anyway is we just specialize with that specific moment of compulsive desire. So we specialize in dealing with the addicted part of the mind and putting people in a position where they can deal with that part of their minds, which is going to try to bully them into engaging in compulsivity. and we are not experts on trauma. And this is an important point because there are experts on trauma out there. There are people out there who will be way better at dealing with trauma than me and Mary, and people can go and see them, and that may help them, especially once they're beyond addiction and they know how to deal with the addictive part of the mind. And this is kind of where, staying in your own lane comes in a little bit, because a lot
Yeah.
of the people we're roasting is they're trying to be experts in every single thing. I'd much rather put my hands up and say, look, we're experts in dealing with compulsive desires, but we're not going to help you with trauma.
Yeah. What I know, staying in my lane, what I know is that when you have an addiction and the addictive part of the mind is going to be coming at you, right? And it's easy to bully a child. It's easy to bullshit a child, right? So we very specifically do the work of getting the rational mind, the rational self on the same team as the child self, because we've got the addictive part of the mind manipulating the child self, using it against you, right? So in those moments of compulsive desire, now in addition to some, deceitful bullshit that the addictive part of the mind is going to bring to the table, now you've got the child self going, but I'm hurt and I'm sad and I'm scared and I'm this and I had this trauma and this terrible things happened to me. And so then it's like, okay, so now we're going to go deal with those emotions, deal with the child self. And the whole time, the addictive part of the mind is just going, ha ha ha. Now I get to just, feed him this bullshit while he's distracted with the child self stuff, rather than deal with the addictive part of the mind, take that child self on, under your wing and go, hey, I got to deal with this shit. It's going to benefit both of us for me to deal with you later. And that's where I say, if there is some stuff, deal with the addictive part of the mind. And then take care of your child self. Get on the same team, but it's got to have a specific order to things to really get this done. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. That's my
100%.
lane.
And
Yeah.
it makes me think of how, like, my experience when I went to therapy, where I go and the therapist is just focusing on like the trauma side of things, the trauma, trying to get some shit out of me. I'm quite an open guy, right? Like, anyone who's listened to a lot of these episodes will know I'm willing to share anything really, a lot of the time. So, I open up, I share some stuff with the therapist. I still felt terrible because at that point in my life, the addictive part of the mind was in control. This is before Beyond Compulsion. Go home, obviously end up binging, edging,
Yeah.
relapsing to, affinity. Like, it was just inevitable. It's so obviously going to happen.
It reminds me of a therapy story. And I don't know what was happening. It was so many years ago. I'm like, okay, I'll go see a therapist and see, I don't know. I think I was broke up a relationship or was just feeling, I don't know what my deal was. he goes, he like, he hangs a baby blanket like on a chair and I'm going to like sit here and look at this baby blanket. He like went and had fucking coffee or something. I don't know what he was doing, but I'm just like sitting in there going, okay, so look at this baby blanket, and it's like gonna bring up some. I don't know. It was just so weird. I was just like, I can't even do this, and I didn't go back. But I'm like, wow, you're making good money, and they're drinking coffee while I'm sitting here staring at this baby blanket, going, what the fuck? Yeah, it was weird.
Yeah.
So I mean,
Oh,
there's the
he is.
therapist or whatever, and that he was obviously. I mean, I think he thought he was gonna accomplish something, but I was so put off by the whole thing that I couldn't even listen to a word he said after that. So, yeah,
Yeah, that sounds pretty wild. I'm not going to lie.
my baby
we had,
blanket.
I used to
Yeah.
be really, really into something called internal family systems, IFS.
Right.
I think you've heard of that as well, right? Yeah, yeah.
Yes, I have. Yep.
Um, yeah, we had a client recently who did our program 2 months, and he left the program, and he was, or maybe it was 3 months, I can't remember, but he was like really, really happy with things, and he was saying how his IFS therapy that he was having outside of the Beyond Compulsion training was like just so much better than ever. I think he said it had been like a year
Yeah,
and a
I
half of
remember.
IFS. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, like a year and a half of IFS before us. and then learned how to deal with the addictive part of the mind, then did IFS, and now he's
Yeah.
like thriving because he's so much better equipped to deal with the child's self by putting the rational mind in control first, and then you can like open up and kind
Yes.
of explore a better relationship with the child's self. And we've got a client who, you'll know who I'm thinking of, but like one of our clients will always have like a really good conversation with the child self after using his
Yes.
script, and
Yeah.
it's so beautiful to like hear those
Yes.
stories.
Yeah. I love
So
it.
it's
Yeah.
definitely possible, and I think if you do deal with the addictive part of the mind correctly, you deal with these compulsive desires, you put the rational mind in control, the opportunities for alleviating feelings of shame and building like a really great like connection with maybe younger parts of yourself are massive. Like that is all there 100%. But I think to sum things up, it's about doing things in the right order, and really
Yes.
dealing with the addiction first, and then you can move on and have all these different areas of growth in your life. But it's very hard to make progress in your life while still
Yeah.
struggling with
And
addiction. Yeah.
and a great relationship like the client we're talking about with that child self, rather than kind of sort of almost fearing the child self because they're going to get you to relapse or whatever with all the emotional stuff when it's not true. They're just being manipulated, and then you can have a good relationship with that child self because everyone wants, I mean, to be like the have that, seeing the world through the eyes of a child, and just like playfulness and creativity and all that can come from that place. And so you definitely don't want to be separate from that self. You want to like come together, but you got to deal with that addictive part of the mind first, take care of
Yeah,
both
yeah.
of you. Yeah, for sure.
100%, definitely. Like at the weekend, just a final thing, then we'll wrap up because I know we've got our group call in a minute. But at the weekend, I was with one of my friends, and funnily enough, she's actually training to be a therapist, so she's quite close to qualifying. And I was just like I was in quite a good mood. I was quite excited. I ended up like walking her back to her house, and at one point on the walk, she was saying how I can be like such a child at times, like, but she was saying it in like a nice way. She was saying it like as a
Yeah.
compliment.
Yeah.
Um, and like, I was like, yeah, like, I know, like, I am just like a big child half the time. Like, I'm not always like that. Like, obviously,
Yeah.
with work, I can be a bit more serious because this is a serious issue. But,
Yeah.
if you're really relaxed and you're with like a very close friend or maybe your partner or, your family, then yeah, you can kind of fool around a little bit. We'll wrap it up
Yeah.
here. All right. Cheers. Hopefully, this is useful to someone. And we'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.
Yeah.